this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's actually has a huge impact on just the way you see the world, the lens through which you look at the world.
Hello, lovelies, and welcome to the Love Life with Court show. As always, I'm your host, Courtney, and if this is your first time tuning into the pod, well, welcome to the family, and if not, here is a warm welcome back. Today, we have Alyse Bacine here with us. Alyse, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So before we dive in, can you just give the audience a little bit of an introduction of yourself, what your story has looked like, and what has brought you to where you are today?
So I am a breathwork and trauma expert, a spiritual mentor. I discovered breathwork 23 years ago when I was 19 years old, and I immediately felt drawn to it, and I started training as a breath worker. And by the time I was 22, I'd done like 4 breath worker trainings and followed different teachers all over, and I started teaching and sharing breath work in my early 20s. At that time, no one really had any idea what it was. Now it's a little bit different. But yeah, so that kind of started me on my path, and breath work really helped me at that time. I was struggling with an eating disorder and anxiety, and I was just kind of looking for answers, and breath work really helped me heal in a lot of ways at that time in my life. And then in late 2019, I just had I knew forever that I was meant to do more than be a school counselor. I just didn't know what that was, but I knew that I could help people in a much bigger way. And then in late 2019, I just had a really strong nudge that I needed to do something different. And I started working with a business coach and immediately just realized I need to start my business, and I started it in the beginning of 2020, and it ended up being perfect timing because in March we went home and I never went back to school. I did work virtually until the end of 2020, and then I quit my job at the end of 2020, and I've been full-time in my business since January 2021. I developed my methodology for clearing trauma, which includes breath work and the trauma clearing tools that I've created called the Metamorphosis Method, and just ended up, coaching women to start their own businesses. And just because that became a natural thing, because I did it and I did it really quickly and I had a lot of success really quickly. So, people were asking me to coach them, and everything I do is really through the lens of trauma. And I know we're going to talk some more specifically about that. But yeah, that's basically the story. And here we are.
Awesome. What a story. You touched on the metamorphosis method. Can you go into what that method looks like and how it's helped you or helped others along the journey?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It kind of developed from the first group program that I created, which was called the Metamorphosis. It's still running. It's called the Metamorphosis. And when I created it, I thought I was just creating tools for people to use with breath work. But then as people started going through it, I started to see that people were healing these major familial and ancestral traumas and their lives were completely changing, and everyone would discover, their deeper purpose and then leave their jobs and start businesses, every single person. And I was okay, I think I have something here. And then I really started to kind of look at it, and I'm okay, well, these tools that I've created are really, a way to clear these major pieces of childhood trauma, right, that we all have. Mm-hmm. And when I say trauma, I just mean, relational dynamics that over time created beliefs about yourself and the world that are limiting, or, that you're not good enough, or you're whatever it is, and obviously bigger traumas as well. But a lot of the childhood trauma that I refer to is based on relational dynamics and patterns that wounded us, or that created some kind of void or some kind of negative belief about ourselves. So anyway, I created that program, and as I saw everyone going through it, I was okay, well, these are these really powerful trauma clearing tools, and they're paired with breath work. So the way that I look at trauma is that when it comes to childhood trauma, there's 4 major traumas. And
Okay.
they're the birth story, which is the circumstances around your birth from conception to 3 months old, and then your mother wound, your father wound, and your sibling wound. And I show people how to look at those things in a way that you've probably never looked at them before, and then draw parallels and see patterns, and then be able to see them in the relationships that you have in your life now. And then I show you how to actually use the relationships in your life now to heal those traumas from childhood so that you can start to operate much differently. And it's paired with the breath work because there's an energy work. So there's multiple components to it because it's not all obviously intellectual. A lot of it is energetic, and a lot of it is living in your body and in your energy field, because most of these patterns, most of these traumas developed, like I know we're going to talk about the birth story, developed when you were in the womb or before you had conscious thoughts or before you were verbal. So a lot of these things will be more like an energetic imprint versus like an actual memory of, a situation or something, although it can be that, but a lot of it goes deeper and it resides in the energy field and in the body. So I use the breath work and the energy work that I've created to clear these things from the body and from the energy field. And then also, with the trauma clearing tools, that accesses it on the level of the mind or the intellect. So it's really getting all levels so that you can create a permanent change. And I feel very passionately about giving people very tangible tools that they can use to create a permanent change. Like, I think I've been in the spiritual transformation world for a very long time, and I don't find it helpful when like certain terms are just like thrown out there of like, oh, you need to like receive more. And it's like, well, what does that mean?
What does that look like? Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm very passionate about making things very easy to understand and very tangible so people can walk away with the ability to navigate their life very differently moving forward, so that you can continue to create change even after, you go through the program. So that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very interconnected process from what I hear. And I think a lot of people too, when it comes to like first starting their spiritual journey, you focus solely on manifesting and connecting with the universe and being abundant, but it's a whole like spectrum of interconnection and balancing like emotional, physical. And I would love to dive into now, what does it mean really when it comes to like birth trauma and birth story? How does that relate to one's like fulfillment in life and achieving success? Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, for sure. So this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's actually has a huge impact on just the way you see the world, the lens through which you look at the world, and then also your ability to start and complete things, like the energy that you're going to hold when it comes to starting something new, starting a project or seeing things through to the end. And then it's also going to have a big impact just on the way that you see your place in the world, right? The way that the type of place you think the world is. So if you think about it, the energy starting with how you were conceived, like what was that environment? Were your parents in love? Were they intending to do it? Or was it, a mistake? Or was it they weren't together? Or was it contentious? Like, what was that energy, right? Because that energy itself around your conception will have a huge impact on just like the way you feel about yourself, the way you see the world, and what you think about relationships, what you think about creating something, So, and then when you think about like developing in the womb, you literally are developing from your mother's cells, which is her energy, her consciousness. Right? So you are literally made of her consciousness. So everything that she thinks and feels and the way that she perceives things, you're going to absorb. So if she was having a lot of fear the whole time that you're developing in the womb, then like you're going to see the world through the lens of fear. That's going to be something that's just naturally there for you. And it's going to come up even more powerfully when you do start something new or you do decide to grow in a certain way. But these things are really hard to pinpoint because it's not a thought, it's not a memory, it's not a belief. It's just like an energetic imprint. It's kind of like an energetic overlay. If you can imagine, like, something going over your eyes and you can only see it through that lens. So it feels like a part of you, and you wouldn't even really know that you're seeing it through that lens. It just feels like So that's why it's really important to deconstruct this. And I've created tools to access the subconscious mind so you can get the information you need around this without having to like talk to your parents. Like I always tell people, like, don't even talk to your parents, because they're going to tell you some story from their perspective that is probably going to confuse you more, because it also might have nothing to do with like what you actually experienced at that time, and everything that you experience is actually there. And because it happens for people all the time, they have memories of it when they use the breath work, because like during the breath work, I guide you to like have memories of it, or to see what it is you need to see, or to release what it is that you need to release. And like everyone has an experience of it, and that's happened to me as well during breath work, where I've had memories of being in the womb. So it's all there. It's just that we're not conscious of it. And, regular society would say like, oh, you wouldn't remember that, or you would have no memory of that. But that's actually not true. It's funny. I just saw somebody sent me a reel this morning, and it was this woman talking about how she has like 2-year-old twins, and they started telling her like what happened during their birth. Like they were saying like, oh yeah, this one came out first, and I guess they were like breech and like facing each other, and they were like, yeah, and we were facing each other this way. Like they knew everything. And I think that, and it too, it's like before you kind of like realize what you're saying, or and I thought that was really interesting, because I think that that's really true, and those things really do have an impact on just like the way that you're going to perceive yourself and the world, and the way you're going to interact with yourself and the world. So I think it's really important to just look at what were those circumstances, what was going on with your parents, what was going on in the world, what was your mom feeling, and also like what kind of pregnancy did she have? Like all of those things are factors. But what I will say, and I just want to make this clear, is like, don't feel like you now need to go like digging and figure out everything about your birth, because like that is just going to keep you spinning your wheels. I think that I always say anything that you need to look at or clear, you'll know. It'll appear in your life, and it's just about knowing how to have a context for it and know how to navigate it, which is what the tools that I've created help you do. So typically, when you have something around your birth coming up, it'll usually be around like starting or completing things, or like a deeper sense of like, the way that you feel about yourself, or maybe it'll be more of like an underlying, like if you feel a constant low level anxiety or something, and you don't know where it's coming from, and it doesn't have like a thought related to it, or it's not, if you've kind of dissected everything and you're like, there's no thought related to this, there's no reason for this, it's just kind of like the way that I'm running, that would be an example of like a birth trauma or a birth story. So, and it can look differently for each person, but like the more that you go down and explore it, the more information you'll get about like, oh, okay, this is something that, happened when I was in the womb that I now need to be aware of, and also make new decisions moving forward. So I'll give you a quick example. So for me, my own birth story, when my mom was pregnant with me, my parents were both teachers here in Philadelphia, and in 1981, the year I was born, it was the biggest teacher strike in history here in Philadelphia. So my parents were not working, and they hadn't worked for months, and they weren't making any money. So like while my mom was pregnant with me, there was a lot of fear around money. There was a lot of like fear and chaos and unknowns and like lack and scarcity when I was developing in the womb, and even when I was born. I think they might have gone back to work like right after I was born or something. I don't remember the exact thing, but it was a whole, like, it was a lot. It was a
Of
kind of like
course.
a traumatic thing. And I had to like really work through a lot of those, of the fear and the lack and the scarcity. That is something that like I continuously have to be aware of and choose out of like regularly, because it's an imprint, you know. So things like that have a tremendous effect on just like the way that you see reality, you know. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
very important to have a context for that so that you can choose to operate differently. And, you know, I have a bunch of ways that I teach people how to do that as well. But just to understand that that's what's happening gives you a huge leg up in
Of course.
anywhere in your life.
Yeah. You touched earlier, you had mentioned like mother womb and father womb. Can you go into what that is?
Yeah. So your mother wound is, you know, your relationship with your mother, basically what you did not get from her that you needed. And then it also could be, you know, any kind of relational dynamic with her that was detrimental to you over time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what I really like to dive into around the mother wound is it goes a lot deeper than just like your relationship with her and just like how she related to you. There's a lot of deeper underlying unconscious patterns that we have with our mother, especially our father too, but it's a little bit different with your father because you're not, even though you have his DNA, you didn't like grow inside of him. So it's a different thing with your mom. So what I see a lot with the mother wound that I think is important to touch on is these deeper patterns of enmeshment. So enmeshment is literally like when you don't really have an awareness of like the difference between you and another person, right? So and that makes sense with your mom because obviously you were a part of her at one point, so it can feel like challenging to separate you and her. But what I
Mm-hmm.
see happen a lot for people is when your mother had some kind of trauma, which is basically everybody, when your mother had some kind of trauma or wounding or whatever it is that she was dealing with, what we do on an unconscious level is we know that in order to survive, we need this person, right? We
Mm-hmm.
need this person to meet all of our needs or we're not going to survive. That's just like basic like survival instinct. So we if we just sense that they're not okay on some level, we will try to mitigate that. We will try to shift that in an effort to get our own needs met, right? So if you sense that your
Mm-hmm.
mom is like hurting or she's not available in some way or she is not present or she can't give you what you need, you will like automatically just kind of tune into her energy and be like, okay, how can I help this situation? How can I help give her what she needs so that I can get what I need? So what happens is, and this is all unconscious, right? This is not something that we think about, but it happens on these very deep levels. But the reason why I know this is because I've seen the way it shows up for people in their lives, including
Mm-hmm.
myself, which is why I understand what this is, because it's not something that you would just know, but you would know it by the way it's showing up in your relationship. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you I'll just give an example of like how it shows up in my relationship with my husband. So how it would show up in my relationship with him is like I automatically like tune into his energy and his emotions to make sure that he's okay and that anything that happens, I'm like trying to mitigate like how he's going to react to it, what his emotions are around it, which is like like not a good pattern to have in a relationship. It's like classic codependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it comes from these deeper patterns of enmeshment, right? So when the relationship that you have with your mom pretty much sets the blueprint for most of your relationships in life, right? There's other things with your father and with your siblings that I'll go into in a minute, but your mom kind of like sets this blueprint, right? Of how you think about relationships, what you think they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are unconsciously enmeshing with her in an effort to get your needs met, meaning that you are like taking responsibility in some way for how she feels. And whether that's just on a deeper energetic level, like you're just kind of like tuning into her to make sure that you're okay. Because really what's supposed to happen is she's supposed to be tuning into you. You know what like she's supposed to be the one who's tuning into you and letting your nervous system attune to her. But if she didn't get that as a child, and or she has some kind of trauma, her ability to do that is just not gonna be.
Yeah, or like mental health disorders, things like that, for sure.
So then you will end up doing it in an effort to get your needs met. You'll end up attuning to her. But then what that creates is an energetic imprint in relationships where you feel like you have to constantly be attuning to the other person and give them what they need in order for you to get what you need. And then what ends up happening is that you just end up unhappy, burnt out, have a lot of anxiety. I mean, it can show up in any way, any kind of symptom, usually not good ones, right?
Yeah. And how do you get over that, though?
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of it, I have like a process to help people with this. And a lot of it is the awareness of it is like 95% of it, right? Is the awareness. And then the rest of it is like, you know, and I have specific tools and processes for people to start developing a sense of safety inside of their close relationships as they start to come back into their own power and sovereignty, right? So like an example of this would be for me to, you know, if my husband is angry about something, right, for me to be able to feel safe inside my own body and not feel like I need to like be supportive or empathetic or whatever, but not feel responsible for his experience and allow myself to feel safe in that moment, right? So that's like the goal, right? Is I'm not, you know, affected or trying or bracing for whatever everyone else around me is feeling, you know? So you eventually over time practice, you know, staying in your power and staying in your sovereignty and feeling safe in that in the presence of other people. And it gradually starts to shift. And then also like doing things like having your own business will really call you forward to shift this type of thing, right? So that's why I think a lot of the people I work with end up being business owners, because these things are very important to understand, and they will create, you know, weird patterns or ceilings or plateaus, you know, unless you understand what's going on a deeper level. So that's the mother wound in a nutshell. There's you know, it's a little different for everyone, but it will, you know, create an imprint for, you know, how you look at relationships and also the level of safety that you feel inside of a relationship. So so that's the mother wound. And then the father wound it's going to be similar, but it's a little bit different in the sense, like I said, it's more going to be like how you relate to the masculine energy, and whether or not he was present for you in the way that you needed. What I notice, it really affects your feelings of enoughness or feelings of value or feelings of you know, confidence or the way that you feel about yourself.
Like your self-worth.
Your self-worth. So if your father, you know, was not physically there or left at some point, or just maybe was like emotionally unavailable or, you know, didn't really acknowledge you, that will definitely affect, you know, just the way that you feel about yourself. And then also just like how you relate to the energy of the masculine and what you think about it, which it varies for different people. And usually there'll be different ways that the father wound can show up based on your relationship with your father, you know, but it's similar in the sense to the mother wound, in the sense of like, you know, these deeper patterns of like how you felt about him, how you related to him, you know, and then how that's showing up in your relationships now. And for some people, you know, typically when it comes to like a romantic partner, typically you'll find someone who is more representative of the parent that like hurt you the most, or the one that you had the most, you know, wounding around or contentiousness with.
Wow.
But sometimes it'll be both. Like sometimes there'll be elements of both. Like for me, for example, my relationship with my husband, it's like mostly my mom, but there's like elements of my dad too. But my mom was just more the one that I had the more contentious relationship with. So so the father wound will vary, but that's typically how I see it. Is it just affects your feelings of like value or worthiness, and also like to feel really like solid in the world, you know, like solid and like provided for, because the masculine has that energy of like being solid, grounded, rooted, providing, you know, safety and structure. And if you didn't have that in your life, then it can kind of create more of like a wobbly feeling in whatever way that wasn't there for you, you know? So with the father wound, it's really just about exploring like what that relationship was, and then what beliefs you created about yourself and the world based on your relationship with him, and also what you watched him, how you watched him relate to himself and the world. And, you know, for me, a lot of my father's stuff came up. It wasn't really necessarily about my relationship with him. It was more about the way that I watched him relate to the world, and like the way that I watched him do things in the world really impacted me and my confidence, and also like my ability to know that I could or couldn't do certain things. Like that came up a lot when I was first starting my business. So just around like feeling like a failure or feeling like I was never going to be able to do it. And I realized these were a lot of ways of thinking that I took on from my dad. So, you know, that's how it showed up for me. It'll be a little different for everybody, but it's just really about going deeper into that relationship, and also what you learned through modeling with him. And then the sibling stuff is really mostly just about, you know, I think what happens with siblings, from what I've observed, is there's this underlying fear or underlying belief that there's not enough love to go around, right? And that's not even necessarily from the family. That's also just like an overall program of like lack and scarcity, right? But when you have a sibling that you have to compete to get your needs met, or compete to get love or connection, then it creates a level of competition and like what I call comparisonitis. So like a sibling wound can surface in like just comparing yourself to other people to see how you measure up, or putting yourself in competition with other people. And you'll see this a lot in the workplace. And I always would laugh so hard because I worked at schools, and it would always be like the principal's the dad, and then all the teachers are like siblings, like fighting for dad's attention or approval. And I'm like, this is so ridiculous, because like no one sees it, but like when you see it, it's like so obvious.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because I actually didn't grow up with siblings, so I never necessarily, I didn't have that experience per se in the home, but it also can happen with friends and stuff like that, any kind of like peer relationships or cousins or whatever. And it really is about, you know, that programming of I have to compete to get my needs met, or there's not enough love to go around type of thing. So when that is healed or shifted, you know, then your sense of like self-worth will skyrocket, but also you don't necessarily waste time anymore with the comparing or the competition type stuff. And that will make your life a lot easier.
For sure. For sure. I know I'm an only child too, and like competitiveness just does not come natural to me. Like I'm just not a competitive person. And my husband, he has siblings, and like even like we'll be playing Monopoly and he like takes my money and I'm like, good job, you killed it. Yeah. And he's like, it's so hard to play games with you because you're not competitive.
Yeah, I know. I'm not really competitive either.
Yeah, and it's that innate nature, because it makes sense if you're like competing for love from a young age. Everything kind of becomes a competition, whether it's love or success or growth in a career. It literally could go on and on.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah. And I notice it with my own kids. Like it's funny because my son is 2 years older than my daughter. And when I had my daughter, my parents brought my son to the hospital and he wouldn't even look at me. He wouldn't even like you know how people have those pictures in the hospital of like, oh, my kids. And like that never happened because my son wouldn't even come near me when he saw that like I had another baby.
It's like, how dare you?
I know. Like we are not on speaking terms.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with me and our listeners, of course. I have one question that I ask all my guests, and it really correlates just loving life with Court. What have you done today to show love to yourself?
Well, I'm actually learning this very obscure ancient Indian martial art right now, and
Oh my God.
yeah, it's no one's ever heard of it. But anyway, I did that this morning. I do it 3 days a week, and it's really hard. It's really freaking hard, and I did that this morning, and that's definitely a way. I really enjoy like disciplined challenges
Yeah,
like that. So that's something that I did this morning that I definitely think shows my love for myself and, just what
of
I really
course.
enjoy in life. So
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you. Before we end today's interview, you've given so much insight to me and the listeners, so I really appreciate it. Can you share if the listeners are interested in connecting with you, where they can find you?
yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Alyse_breathes. Also, my website, AlyseBreathes.com. I'm on Facebook. I also have a podcast that's called Reclaiming Consciousness. That's a great place to connect with me as well. And then if you do want, I'll give you the link for the trauma cheat sheet too, so people can check that out and see where they fall on the trauma list.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out too myself. And for the listeners, you'll be able to find all that information below. Just check out the show notes. Thank you, Alyse, so, so very much. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'll leave you with this friendly reminder to not only be kind to others, but also to your beautiful, amazing self. We will see you on the next episode.